Hello, I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review, the last one for 2025. And as is the last podcast this week, we'll be featuring the main events of the week, plus a little bit of a wrap-up of the main security and diplomatic developments of the year, and also the legislative changes that took place in Armenia. This week in the news, the Armenian government is prepared to fund the rehabilitation of several strategic railway segments currently under Russian management should the Russian side fail to fulfill its obligations. The International Committee of the Red Cross visits all Armenians currently held in Azerbaijan, and the World Bank approves a $250 million grant for immediate housing assistance to Artsakh Armenians. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news. This week, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan met Russia's President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, Russia. The two leaders discussed regional rail restorations and TRIP, among other things. They also reviewed trade and energy cooperation, including nuclear projects. In St. Petersburg, Pashinyan also participated in the Eurasian Economic Union Supreme Council, discussing common markets for oil and petroleum products, the 2026 budget for the organization, and international partnerships. In his address, Pashinyan highlighted the need to balance regional mechanisms with national sovereignty. He praised expanding ties with partners like Iran and China, welcomed cargo transit through Azerbaijan as a step towards regional peace, and reaffirmed Armenia's commitment to the EAEU. Pashinyan also joined an informal Commonwealth of Independent States, this is the CIS, summit at the Hermitage Museum, and met with St. Petersburg's Armenian community, discussing government priorities and regional developments. And at a press briefing on December 25, the Prime Minister said that the Armenian government is prepared to fund the rehabilitation of several strategic railway segments currently under Russian management from the state budget should the Russian side fail to fulfill its obligations. Pashinyan identified three priority sections: the Tavush segment, the Akhurik section from the Armenia-Turkey border to the existing operational railway, this is the Yerevan-Gyumri Tbilisi Railway, and the segment linking the Armenia-Nakhichevan border to Artsakh. He described the restoration of these lines as crucial and said Yerevan expects the work to be carried out as quickly as possible. However, the Prime Minister noted that if it becomes clear that Russia is facing difficulties or delays implementing the repairs, Armenia is ready to revoke the concession for those sections and proceed with the restoration independently. And as a background, since 2008, Armenia's railway system has been operating under a 30-year concession agreement with Russian state-owned company Russian Railways, which has committed to infrastructure modernization, rolling stock renewal, and safety upgrades. And Armenia's Prime Minister also announced this week that Armenia and the United States are currently in the process of drafting a key document outlining the strategic framework of TRIP. Speaking to reporters after a cabinet meeting, he said that both sides will need to adopt the document in some format or another before moving to the next steps. He added that on the ground, work on the project would likely begin in the second half of 2026, with the railway project likely being the initial initiative, and as the tracks are pre-existing. But the Prime Minister also did not rule out that following feasibility and investment attractiveness studies, it might emerge that the gas or oil pipeline project should be implemented first. And Turkey has started technical inspections and preparatory work at the Alican border checkpoint on the Turkish side of the Marmara crossing. According to Turkish media reports, the crossing is expected to initially open for cargo transport, with passengers planned to be allowed through at a later stage. A high-level Turkish delegation visited the site this week, including the governor of İğdır, the head of the migration services of Turkey, and the acting director general of logistics at Turkey's Ministry of Defense. The developments follow remarks made on December 16 by the Turkish president, who said Turkey intends to take symbolic steps towards normalization with Armenia in early 2026. And another development in the Armenia-Turkey normalization process, Turkish Special Envoy for Normalization talks with Armenia, Serdar Kilic, announced that Turkish Airlines will begin operating daily Istanbul-Yerevan-Istanbul flights. This is starting March 11, 2026. Kilic described the launch of this route as another step forward in efforts to normalize relations between the two countries. Direct flights between Yerevan and Istanbul have operated intermittently repeatedly over the last decades, by the way, by Armenian carriers. In 2022, amid renewed normalization talks between Armenia and Turkey, Turkish low-cost carrier Pegasus Airlines also began operating direct flights. Now, Turkey's national carrier is set to enter the market as well. And another shipment of Russian wheat is en route to Armenia via Azerbaijan. According to Russian railway authorities, 7 rail cars loaded with wheat departed from Russia's Volgograd region. By the end of 2025, approximately 2,000 tons of wheat are planned to be transported along this route. In addition to grain, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Uverchuk said Russia also plans to export fertilizers to Armenia through Azerbaijan, describing the developments as one that would have seemed unimaginable until recently. According to Uverchuk, Yerevan and Moscow are also discussing the organization of cargo transportation from Armenia to Russia via Azerbaijan. And just as a reminder, on November 6, a separate train carrying around 1,000 tons of Russian wheat reached Armenia via Azerbaijan and Georgia. And also the 1,300 tons of Azerbaijani gasoline that arrived in Armenia last week will be sold below market prices after this is because Georgia waived transit fees for the delivery. And by the way, the waiver applies only to the first shipment. It's not a permanent thing. It emerged that one of the importers of Azerbaijani gasoline is Mega Trade, an organization affiliated with businessman and ruling civil contract lawmaker Khachatur Sukyasyan, also known by the nickname Gurzo. The other importer is a lesser-known company linked to businessman Samvel Alexanian, and Megatrade has said it plans to continue purchasing gasoline from Azerbaijan. And this week, representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross visited all Armenians currently held in Azerbaijan. Zara Amatuni, head of the communications for the ICRC office in Armenia, said the delegation also included a doctor. According to her, the visits focused on detainees' health, their treatment, the conditions of their detention in line with the organization's standard procedures. Well, ICRC operations have been suspended in Azerbaijan at Baku's request. Amatuni said that the latest visit was organized by the ICRC's headquarters in Geneva and was also the result of ongoing dialogue between the organization and the Azerbaijani authorities. However, with a lot of the ICRC announcements, there's very little detailed information about the situation. We did get updates this week about the health of one of Armenian detainees in Baku, Vakif Khachatarian, who is serving a 15-year prison sentence in Azerbaijan. He has been hospitalized. The Azerbaijani media reports say Khachatarian was experiencing breathing difficulties and chest pain. He was first transferred to a medical facility under Azerbaijan's Ministry of Justice, where he received intensive care. He was later moved to a state medical institution. He is in critical condition. Khachatarian, who is 70 years old, was detained in 2023 during Azerbaijan's blockade of Artsakh. He was being taken through the Lachin corridor to Yerevan to receive medical treatment, and he was actually apprehended from under the auspices of the International Committee of the Red Cross. In Baku, Khachatarian was charged with alleged involvement in genocidal actions against Azerbaijanis during the first Nagorno-Karabakh war in the early 1990s. In November of 2023, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And an Azerbaijani court has sentenced Garen Avanesian, a 58-year-old ethnic Armenian, to 16 years in prison on charges including terrorism and illegal possession of weapons. Avanesian had remained in Stepanakert after the ethnic cleansing of the entire Armenian population of Artsakh. The verdict was delivered by the Ganja Court of Grave Crimes following a trial that concluded with Avanesian's final statement. Avanesian was arrested on September 14 this year during a visit by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev to Stepanakert. According to Azerbaijani authorities, he was in possession of a Kalashnikov assault rifle and ammunition and was trying to approach a venue during President Ilham Aliyev's visit to Stepanakert. He resisted arrest and was wounded in the ensuing exchange of fire and detained. And speaking of President Aliyev and Stepanakert, this week the Azerbaijani president and the First Lady inaugurated a victory park in Stepanakert. This was on the occasion of the president's birthday. According to Azerbaijani media reports, the park includes 44 steps leading to a victory arch symbolizing the days of the 2020 war. The site also features a plaque listing liberated settlements as well as details of the military operation conducted in Karabakh in 2023. And the World Bank approved a $250 million grant to support housing programs in Armenia. As part of the state housing support effort, the program will provide immediate rental assistance to more than 40,000 Artsakh Armenians and help around 6,500 refugee families purchase permanent housing through mortgage subsidies. The financing will also support the National Mortgage Company of Armenia, enabling it to refinance commercial banks participating in the program and modernize management systems. And a little bit of elections, because the coming year is going to be the year of parliamentary elections in Armenia. Former Yerevan Mayor Haik Marutian has announced that he will run in Armenia's 2026 elections with his new force party. This is Nor-Uj, that's what his party is called. Marutian said the party follows a social democratic ideology and will focus on addressing social issues. He also said the party will hold a formal congress and present its electoral program. Several political forces have already stated their participation in the elections. Those include the ruling Civil Contract Party, former human rights defender Arman Tatoyan's Wings of Unity Initiative. It's an alliance with Shant Harutyunyan's United National Initiative Party, with Arman Tatoyan as the candidate for Prime Minister. The Our Way Merdzevov movement, linked to jailed businessman Samvel Karapetyan, is also participating, even though we're not clear if they will register a political party and who the candidate will be. Lawyer Nina Karapetyan's Najar Scale Party is participating. Businessman Garik Zarukyan's Prosperous Armenia Party is participating. And former President Robert Kocharyan's Armenia Alliance, which includes the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, has said they will be participating. And also this week, the Armenian National Congress, this is the party led by First President Levon Ter-Petrosyan, said they will run with Levon Zurabian, the party's deputy president, as their candidate for prime minister. And as it has been a constant in our week in review in the recent months, a little bit about church-state relations. At this week's cabinet meeting, the government approved changes to the legal framework governing the allocation of land to the church. The draft legislation requires approval by parliament and will not apply retroactively to land plots already granted to the church. Under current regulations, state and community-owned land can be transferred to the church for free and with ownership rights for the construction and maintenance of churches and church-affiliated buildings. Under the proposed changes, such land would instead be provided to the church for free, but without transferring ownership. And according to the government, the initiative is intended to improve the efficiency of land use management. And new developments regarding the air quality in Yerevan, and Maria Titizian did an It Has to Be Said section on it just this week. That was also followed up by an in-depth article by Hovannes Nazaretian. But the updates are that the Urban Development Committee has approved the requirements for construction sites aimed at reducing emissions. The new rules mandate dust suppression measures, the use of low-emission equipment, air cleaning systems, and on-site air quality monitoring devices. Temporary roads at construction sites will also be required to have hard surfaces with exposed soil covered to prevent dust. Officials say the charges are intended to reduce the impact of large-scale construction on air quality in Yerevan and across the country. Separately, the government has designated the Ministry of Environment as the sole body authorized to conduct state air quality monitoring and provide official data, ending reliance on data supplied by the Yerevan municipality, which has not been very reliable recently. And authorities say the move is intended to address public confusion caused by readings from private platforms and localized sensors, which they argue do not reflect overall citywide air quality. And one more update about air quality. The government also plans to introduce a new air quality index aligned with European standards. A nationwide real-time monitoring network is expected to be fully operational by January 1, 2030. So no one hold your breath. And a little bit of a subject that made headlines and was the subject of a lot of misinformation or misinterpretation. It's regarding the funding for the construction of the new Artsakh metro station, which has been revised, and the funds were allocated to purchase 45 trolley buses instead. This is for the city of Yerevan. Under the 2025 state budget, 9.6 billion drams were initially allocated for the project. This is the metro project. However, due to delays linked to project approval and procurement procedures, most of the funds were not used within this fiscal year and were therefore reallocated. Yerevan Mayor Artsakh Armenians said the newly purchased trolley buses are expected to arrive early in 2026. And under the 2026 state budget, 2 billion drams have been allocated to launch the construction of preparation work for the metro station, with funding set to increase later. And a quick summary of some of the main developments from 2025. In terms of diplomacy, 2025 can quite easily be called the year of strategic partnerships for Armenia. In pursuit of its efforts to diversify foreign affairs and security, the Pashinyan government either formalized or agreed to elevate bilateral ties with 9 countries and the EU to a level of strategic partnership. Yerevan signed strategic documents with the US, the EU, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, China, and Kazakhstan. It further announced plans to formally upgrade ties with France, Iran, the UK, and potentially India. In March, Armenia and Azerbaijan finalized the text for the peace treaty, which was initialed on August 8 in Washington, D.C. The trilateral declaration, also signed by the U.S. President Donald Trump, envisioned the creation of TRIP, the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, as part of ongoing communications between the two countries on the basis of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. A key development in Armenia-U.S. relations is the $500 million AI data center set to be built in Hrazdan. For Armenia-EU relations, Armenia and EU signed a strategic agenda to significantly deepen and expand ties this year, and also began work towards visa liberalization. And about legislation, this year the Armenian parliament passed several significant laws. After several years of delay, the National Assembly finally approved a major healthcare reform, introducing universal healthcare insurance. This will be starting January 1, 2026. The first phase will cover children, seniors, people with disabilities, vulnerable groups, and some employees, with the state subsidizing most costs. By 2029, the government plans to extend coverage to all citizens and residents, with services available at public and private healthcare facilities, and details to be published online later. This year, the government also adopted a bill reducing the duration of compulsory military service from 2 years to a year and a half. The law will take effect on January 1, again, 2026, and will not apply to those already serving at the time. The Armenian parliament also adopted a new law on cybersecurity, along with a broader legislative package aimed at overhauling the country's digital governance framework. The National Assembly also passed major amendments to Armenia's family code and the law on the rights of the child and the child protection system, laws first adopted back in 1996 that experts say had serious gaps, and we as a society experienced those gaps. The new package strengthens the role of community social workers, introduces new monitoring and rapid response systems, defines clearer responsibilities for regional authorities, and establishes mechanisms to prevent and address bullying. It also ensures that children's opinions are taken into account in care decisions, removing previous age limits. And last but not least, Armenia's parliament passed legislative amendments that could enable the nationalization of the electric networks of Armenia. The changes enable the Public Service Regulatory Commission, the country's public utilities agency, to initiate proceedings against energy sector operators on violations, including those committed prior to the law's enactment. And a quick rundown of what we published this week. As I mentioned earlier, EVN's editor-in-chief Maria Titizian's segment, It Has to Be Said, about Yerevan's air crisis was published this week. It talks about the air pollution and emphasizes that it's no longer background noise and it's a public health emergency, and points out several of the causes for the air pollution and points out several of the main causes for the poor air quality in Yerevan specifically. And this was also followed up by a more in-depth article by Hovannes Nazaretian. It's again called Yerevan's Air Crisis Inside the Pollution Emergency, that really looks into not only the problems but also what kind of solutions the government is at least talking about. And we had an installment of Olesya Vartanyan's column, what a ceasefire in Ukraine could mean for the South Caucasus. The war in Ukraine still dominates Eastern Europe's political agenda, but its consequences extend far beyond the South Caucasus. Amid Georgia's prolonged crisis, a ceasefire in Ukraine could become a test for political maturity, revealing which states seize new opportunities and which risk deeper isolation. And a piece by Nesha Skopalyan, and this is an opinion piece. It's called The False Politics of Revisionism. Nesha Skopalyan examines how distorted narratives seek to undermine the Velvet Revolution, erase popular sovereignty, and normalize cynicism, victimhood, and authoritarian nostalgia, and this is used as tools to weaken democracy and collective agency. And we are finishing the year with the new issue of our lifestyle magazine, Salt. This issue is called Charge. The idea is to charge forward and charge your batteries and collect your energy because the new year is around the corner. And it was also a 1-year anniversary of us launching Salt, so it's our 13th at this point issue. What we've done so far, what we've published so far in Salt is 2 articles. Both kind of look back in time at more traditional Armenian experiences around New Year. One is called The 1990s and Adas Gümri Gata, and it's the story of a woman who in the 1990s, an engineer by profession, realizes that she still has some other tools that she can use for survival, and she launched a pastry business. And there's like so many women back in the day who were making pastries to support their family. She's very successful now doing other things, but it's a down the road kind of a reminiscent text of how things were. And another piece we published just today is by Sona Martirosyan, a first-time contributor. It's called Santa Came When the Lights Were Out. It's a childhood memory about Christmas Eve in Armenia's dark and cold years. It becomes a tender and humorous meditation on belief and survival. And it's seen through the eyes of a 6-year-old. And that's what we have in Salt. We have more articles coming up next week. But before I sign off, we did publish an installment of Itinerary, December 2025. This is a curated collection of art events and exhibitions in Armenia by Viken Galestian. Do check it out. A lot of the events are still ongoing and will be open for months. So yeah, there's always something new to see in Yerevan. And that was all for this year. Thank you everyone for listening. And we will be back again in 2026.